And we're live. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now time for another great episode of Beyond Higher Heights with Vangie Williams. I'm your host, Seko Varner, and this young lady is the beautiful, the magnanimous, the wonderful, the everything, Vangie Williams. How you doing, Vangie?
I'm doing great. How are you doing tonight?
Excellent. So tonight we're going to learn about your immigrant family background and some of the lessons you've learned from their immigration, right?
That's right. That's right. So it was interesting because Kamala, you know, I like the way she says her alternate name, Mamala. She came out real strong with her Indian and Jamaican roots. And what a lot of people don't know is that on my father's mother's side, we are Indian, and on my mother's father's side, we are Jamaican. So I am a Geechee girl and I'm an Indian girl and I got white and I got my Nigerian in me. So I am multicultural. And it is really interesting because growing up, you kind of don't know all these things, but you figure it out real quickly when you start watching things like Roots. Roots was the beginning of me tracing my family tree. And people say, wow, that came out in the 70s. Yes, but around that time, I was growing up in a situation where both my grandmothers, my mother's mother and my father's mother, were literally taking me down to Spartanburg, South Carolina, Fairfield, Kings Mountain, and teaching us about our Native American heritage, our Jamaican heritage, our our black and our white heritage. And then in Virginia, Westmoreland, Virginia is where, my father's mother is from. And I talk about those two mothers in
Okay.
particular because so as a genealogist, there's a saying that we're taught from a very young age when you're a genealogist. And if people don't know what a genealogist is, I trace family trees. I've been doing it now since I'm going to date myself, Seko, 1987. I started tracing my family tree. And in doing that, it became a business. Broken Life Journals is my business. I've been the CEO of that company since 1988, technically. And it started with my own family tree and learning who I was, recognizing the past and understanding who they were, what they stood for, and why they were there. And a lot of people say, well, I don't care. The past is the past. But until you learn the past, you cannot move forward with the future. So first things first, yes, roots was important. And, Alex Haley set the pace for a lot of Black families to learn where they come from, who their African roots were. Now, ironically, my last name, my maiden name is Roots, Rooths. Now, there's some history behind that as well. Having a dynamic family is one thing. Having a really dynamic family connected to such historical leaders as George Washington, Robert E. Lee, Jefferson Davis, Benjamin Franklin. Oh my God, I can keep going on and on. I am related to so many historical political figures. I literally am the black sheep of the family as far as someone running for office. And it goes on and on. So let's talk about the immigrants in my family. And you and I have talked about this a little bit. So my family has been in the first district of Virginia since 1649. Understand that this country, the first African to arrive in Virginia, came in 1619. And historically, her name is Angela. And right now, they're doing an archaeological dig in Jamestown on slave Angela. Now, I'm going to tell you how important Angela is to the factor of all this. Angela's history marks a milestone. So here we are, 2020, 401 years ago, that they give this woman credit now. My family came right behind that. My family is made up of Indian American coming from India. And if you remember, if you can show a picture of my great grandfather, you can see his lineage. He is an Indian American from Southeast Asia, what is now referred to as Pakistan. And I'm kind of really proud of that heritage because his father was beautifully dark. He had that deep color in him, but that jet black hair. And you can see my great grandfather had that hair, but his father was really dark. His father's father was really dark. And this is where the history in it comes so blazingly obvious. My great grandfather came to this country in the 1740s. He changed his name from a Patel to Willis. He named himself George Washington Willis. And that was important because he married a woman named Figgett out of what now is known as West Virginia. She was a white woman. And he lightened his family in that one step. He was a freedman. He came here with his cousins, 4 cousins. So there were 5 cousins total. Let's put one hand up. 5 cousins total. Follow me, y'all. He named himself Willis after his wife's family, which were the Washingtons. His cousins took the names of Brown with an E and without an E, White, Gray, and Green with an E and without an E. And they separated into Caroline County, Hanover County, Richmond proper, James City. They spread far and deep. So those 5 cousins came from the 1st District of Virginia. I always say to people, if you are from this country truly, I guarantee you have relatives related to me, and I guarantee you your roots go far and wide. Because if you look at it, James City was officially the first county. Jamestown is where the first Americans came in. So that makes the 1st District of Virginia truly the 1st district of the country. So I dig a little bit deeper. Again, genealogist here. I traced all sides of my family tree. And the one that intrigues, there's only 2 that intrigue the heck out of me. So I want to give you some of my surnames. I am a Roots. I am a Stewart out of South Carolina. I'm a Jackson, Johnson, Bell, Burgess, you name it, out of South Carolina. Out of Westmoreland County, I'm a Willis, a Figgett, a Templeman, a Nelson, Green, Brown, Gray, White, Jackson, Johnson, Stewart, Washington, Lee. Do I need to keep going on and on? I'm related to, I'm a Cole. I'm a Smith. Okay. I have so many. I'll give you a funny story. Yesterday, I was out with Glenn, and it wasn't yesterday, it was Friday. And I mentioned, I was looking at a client's house because I'm a real estate agent. And
Glenn is your husband, right?
My husband is a
Glenn
contractor.
is your husband, right?
Yeah.
Glenn's your husband. So, okay.
And I was talking to my friend whose mother's house I was looking at to put on the market. And I just said to her, I said, okay, she said, yeah, the grandfather was a Smith. And I went, whoa, time out. Because ironically, this land was so close to my ancestral lands, the Roots family, that I had to ask. What was his name? And she said, I'm going to say blank Smith. And I said, wait, Isaac Smith's brother, which is my great-great-grandfather. She said, yeah. I went, oh, we're cousins. Now I understand. She's white. Okay?
white. Okay.
I knew we were kin. Finally, we're family. That has gone on for the last 4 years. Every room I walk into, I find at least one, no less than 3 cousins if they are from here. So it's important to know these things. But I digressed a little bit. The family tree. You know, when you look in the mirror, you look and you try to figure out who you look like, what culture you look like. And I didn't realize it until I was talking to some family members who tended to look sort of more Indian than anything. And they were explaining to me how they kept their Indian traits. And it was because one of the cousins was really adamant in bringing Indian women back here or here to America because they felt that they were going to lose who they were once children were being born and what have you. Well, look at me. I did not lose very much of that Indian trait. My great grandmother, her eyes were hazel, her hair was jet black, very long. And if you look at her, she, even 4 generations later, those strong Indian traits stayed forward. Same with me. If you look at, I think I sent you a picture of my grandmother with her daughters. And my favorite Aunt Wanda looked so much like my great grandfather that I used to say, "You look like him." Well, everyone says I look like her. And I couldn't understand it because I didn't think I looked like her until recently. I was walking down in Westmoreland County, and this lady walked up and she said, "You look so much." She was a much older woman. She was almost 100 years old. And she said, "Right, you," as I had my mask on. Okay. And she said, "You look so much like my good friend Mabel. I love her. She passed away a couple of years back." And I'm looking at her and I don't know this woman because she has a mask on. And she said, "Yeah, Mabel Willis." And I went, "Edith, Mabel Willis?" She said, "Yes." I said, that's my grandmother." And she said, "Wait, hold it down." And she looked at me. She was like, "You look just like her." I've heard that before, never paid attention. Now, having me right next to her, I see it. I actually see it. And that's important. I can tell you, Kamala Harris, I got to give her much props. You know, my Indian heritage starts back in the 1740s, but I never let it go. I feel it's important to know who you are and know why you're here. And campaign wise, it shows that there's truth in knowing that immigrants built the country. No matter if you're white, black, Indian, Asian, you built the country. But it also gives credence to this is the greatest melting pot on earth. And that this melting pot creates such beautiful souls all over. Every one of us who were born into this country, whether they were born, their parents were born here or not, brought a piece of culture to this country that we have grown with. And I'm proud of my culture. Now, our family history is a little wonky. I told you about the 5. They came up Pope's Creek, and it was one of those things because there was also a gentleman named Goodrich or Gutrich on that same ship. Being that he was the one who was chartering the ship, it was assumed that their last names were Gutrich and they came out of Spain. But after doing much research, it turns out that these 5 cousins came up to Pope's Creek on this ship with Goodrich or Gutrich, and they came through Spain. But their goal was when they got here was to learn how to grow American crops, which were tobacco and maize, but bring part of that culture from India here, which was part English, which was tea, rice, you name it, what else? Soy, you name it. They brought that here. And it also introduced another element. It introduced the element of my family who wanted to see people free. And, coming across parts of family history that people don't know is always one of those, that was my family? Wow. So I wrote a book called Broken Life Journals. And I kind of I made a part of it fiction, so it's a historical fiction, and it talks about family history of how two of the uncles that came up that passed for white literally were going up and down the East Coast buying slaves and taking them to Nova Scotia and to Ireland and Scotland to freedom. But they kept a journal of who they took out of this country to freedom. But they also did something that was amazing. If you look at my great-grandfather and my great-grandmother, they were a mixed pair. See, Virginia Nelson was a mixed woman. Her grandmother was a Figget. What I found amazing was that her picture is so colored to make her look darker. And yet she wasn't that dark. And I find it amazing that my great-grandfather, he was a hot man. I'm telling you, because the first time I put him on Facebook, women were like, oh, I was like, he's my grandfather, my great-grandfather, and he's gone. Those two were part of a legacy that continued on and on. So I've often asked the question to people, do you know where your roots are? Because my roots, I know where they are. Now, I'm going to give you an important fact. My grandmother married a man whose name was Albert Burgess. Mr. Burgess comes out of Blacksburg, South Carolina, along with his family, and they landed in Alexandria, Virginia. And that long line of family right there is the hardest part to trace, because he was of slave blood. And if you remember, during the Civil War, a lot of people came out of the South, out of South Carolina, North Carolina, and came up to Alexandria. And many of them died en route to what was a better life. And if you go to Alexandria, there's a memorial there. It used to be a gas station. I can't remember the name. It's by Bellhaven Park. And the wall lists all the people who they could find that was buried on that property. I mean, 5 and 6 people deep in the ground, because they died from the cold. They died from starvation. They died from just travel. And I found it amazing that my family stayed in Alexandria and they flourished. And I'm going to tell you, Seko, growing up in Virginia and DC and Maryland is real hard when lots of people are related to you. It's really hard. And my husband comes out of North Carolina, out of Enfield, North Carolina. That's where his family's from. And we're not kin. He had me verify that. We are not kin. But it's important to know where you're coming from. Now, politically, I understand the struggles. I understand it from the standpoint of being a family of immigrants. I understand it from being a family of Blacks. And I understand it from the point of being poor, from poor whites. A lot of people probably don't know or realize that I'm related to the Lovings. The Roots and the Lovings, they took up South Capitol Street, DC for this very reason, because love knew no shade of color. It only knew love. And I really appreciate the saying, Virginia's for lovers, because it is. I think I told you this before. One part of my family, the Willis family, is the reason why the law was written that no statesman can marry a woman of color. Yet, on the flip side, on the Roots Loving side, the Lovings in particular, is the reason why the law was overturned. And to this day, I still say Route 1 throughout Virginia, from Alexandria to Richmond, needs to be renamed the Mildred and Richard Loving Highway, because they brought love back to Virginia in a way that says we are one people, we are Virginians, and that we are proud to be Virginians. Um, so hopefully they are listening. Are y'all hearing me? But so it's an interesting history. I'm proud of it.
Okay, so let's tell us about some of the stories that your grandparents got a chance to seed into you that are helping you to move beyond higher heights.
You know, okay, so I come from a long, I'm going to say a long line of women, strong women. I'm a mother of 6 daughters. I'm an only child. My mother is one of 4. My father, although he was one of 5, he had 3 sisters. On my mother's side, again, heavy women. I've only known women, strong women in my life. And I realized that they came from cultures that women tended to be the strength of the family, although in the backbone, but they always stayed in the shadow. And a lot of people say, well, how does that affect you now? It was because that was our culture. Our culture is women are in the room, but they're never to speak. Our culture was women were the providers of the children, but not the providers of the castle. But I think in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, that changed greatly. And I think, you got to thank heroes like Shirley Chisholm for saying, I am woman, hear me roar. I'm going to Capitol Hill and I'm going to do my thing. And I have to say, learning her name when I was around, I don't know, I had to have been around maybe 18. I had to start looking her up because that was somebody to look up to and emulate. Now, little girls can look up to Kamala Harris and emulate. And I want people to understand that. Now, as far as what family taught me, it's really kind of cool. I am a country girl at heart, 1,000,000%. And I get the snickers because when people go, well, it's not all about the rural communities. Well, I was taught different. See, in rural communities, my great grandparents and my great greats, even today, the Willis Farm is one of the oldest working farms in the state of Virginia. I think the last time I checked, it was the 3rd oldest working farm in the state of Virginia. That's amazing. Now, thanks to our most recent president, my family has really stopped farming because it is not profitable to do so. Who are they going to sell their soy to? Who are they going to sell their corn to? So rather than developing a crop that's going to come out and yield product that you have no one to sell it to, the best thing to do is not. So hopefully, vote, people, so that we can change this and renegotiate the TPP, because my family instilled a few things in me. You are who needs to vote. They instilled the fact that education was priority, especially especially my grandmothers. So grandmother Willis, she was out of Westmoreland County, did not want me to go to Washington Lee High School, did not want me born in Westmoreland County, did not want me anywhere near Northern Neck. So, funny story, my mom climbed to the top of the Washington Monument 3 days before I was born in 1968, came down 2 days later, July 28th, bam, here I am. Because, my grandma was like, good. So I was born in DC for that reason. And I lived with my grandmother and my grandfather off and on while my mom worked for the post office while she did her civil service and everything. And I remember about 5 or 6 years old, my mom saying, "Well, I'm driving for Metro now, so you can come live with me." But I was still going between grandparents' house. And I remember in school, I went to a school called Evelyn Elementary School, and I was bused from PG County, Maryland, from way over in District Heights, all the way over to Camp Springs, Maryland. It's a long ride for a little kid to get on the bus. And I didn't understand that this was PG County's way of breaking up Black neighborhoods and making sure that Black children, were a little bit more cultured, because they weren't separating white kids and their families. They were separating Black kids from their families. And it was like that Good Time scene when Michael said, "You're going to bus me to the white school, boss." That you remember that scene, Seko. And I remember I got to the school, but I was raised around Black, white, Indian, Native American. So that blend, I was used to it. But I remember the culture shock of some of the kids who lived in my neighborhood who did not fare very well, because I always had grandparents who felt education was number one. By the time I was in kindergarten, I was reading. By the time I was in third grade, I already knew my multiplications. I knew history. I knew all the states. I even remember dating myself in class, voting for Jimmy Carter. Yes, I remember we did the Gerald Ford one. I remember that. And then I remember the Jimmy Carter vote. And I was thinking to myself, would they have ever done this in a Black school? Would they have really instilled how important voting was in a Black school? Think about it. What do you think?
I want to say yes, but I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, so I had a different experience.
Yeah, you were above the Mason-Dixon line. It was much more
It was
friendly.
different. It
Yeah.
was different, and Brooklyn is a blood type, so we're a little different.
Well, and speaking of Mason-Dixon line, when I tell people who come from anywhere above DC, when I tell them there's a different culture from DC down, people don't believe me. I grew up in DC, Maryland, okay, and Virginia and South Carolina in the summers. The difference between DC and Virginia and DC, we kind of had that little mixture of New York and New Jersey and Delaware mixed in us. But we understood if you went to Virginia, you better have act right on, because you didn't know what was going to happen on the way here. Now, my family always went down 301, crossed the nice bridge, and came into King George, okay? I remember how many times we got pulled over going through Southern Maryland. Southern Maryland was a no-no for people in DC. But that was my family's culture. And it never dawned on me that this racism that they were going through was really prevalent then. So I have family right now to this day who's like, I'm not messing with Southern Maryland. I'm not messing with King George. And I'm definitely not messing with Westmoreland County Police. And I'm like, well, don't speed. It's not about speeding. It's actually driving while black. Driving while black was a thing back in the 70s and 80s, and it's really bad now. But the family taught me, be strong, be clear, be there. Then you look at the other side, and we got to talk about the Geechee side of the family, because that Geechee side includes my grandmother's side on my mother's side and my grandfather's side on my father's side. And interesting enough, Burgess Bell and Stuart Bell, yep, they were cousins. they married two separate people and out of two separate worlds. But I asked my grandfather one day, I was like, why did your family leave Blacksburg, South Carolina? He was like, because when you're a slave, when your family has been slave for so long, you can't stay there. Because you'll always be a slave to certain people. Even I would say probably about 8 years ago, I understood when I went to Blacksburg, South Carolina. We haven't graduated from that slave mentality in a lot of places because those who oppress Black people want to oppress you in ways that it makes a difference. Voting, jail, voting, jail. If they can stop you by getting you imprisoned, they will do it. And then I looked at now understand he comes from a dark-skinned family, okay? Flip side, my great-grandma Lucy, that was the picture you originally had up there. Her husband, my other great-grandma, my, now, Rachel Nelson, this woman, she was blessed because her mom was Julia Figgett out of what is now West Virginia. And Julia was a strong white woman. And Julia made sure that her children could read, write, and were above average. And Julia made sure that Westmoreland County had the finest of women in her family. Now this is the part where you just kind of cringe. That go my great grandma Lucy. So great grandma Lucy is of she's a Stewart. She married Charles Stewart, who was of a slave family. If you look at my great grandma, she does not look all that dark. She was not all that dark. In fact, my mother looks exactly like her. And great grandma Lucy, when I used to go to her house in Spartanburg, would say things to me like, understand who your family was, especially when I was tracing a family tree, to find out that the Stewart family, who were severely Geechee, she did not understand her mother-in-law because she did not speak anything but patois. And her husband could translate, but when he got killed, she made sure that her children knew that they were Geechee. And they always say I'm Geechee in two ways, Indian and Jamaican. But I want you to remember something. Jamaica is made up of a few types of people: Black, Indian, and white. And the Jamaicans and the Indians produced beautiful, beautiful cultural people. And when Charles Stewart Sr., not my great grandma's husband, but his father, came up from Jamaica on a charter, I guess one of the barter boats, he came up with a Captain Stewart, and he's listed on the manifest as property of Mr. or Captain Stewart out of Jamaica. And on that same boat, they list a whole lot of other people, but he was the first hand to Captain Stewart. And he met Miss Nora, Miss Ada Bell, also out of Jamaica, up in Kings Mountain, North Carolina. And they settled in Fairfield, South Carolina. That Jamaican part of us was squashed. We knew that we had Native American in us from Kings Mountain. I knew I had it from Virginia. But the Native American was not a true indigenous Native American, but they were slaves of the tribe. And a lot of people didn't realize that you can be a Native American, not blood, but Native American by ownership into a tribe.
Right. Yeah. The 5 quote unquote civilized tribes who went in cahoots with the American government actually had enslaved Africans as a part of their manifest, as part of their census. So my ancestry involves Cherokee, and that Cherokee group 15 to 20% of the population at one time were the enslaved Africans that the Cherokees had.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
we're Cherokee, we're Blackfoot, I'm Po Monkey, and I'm Mattaponi. Again, I can't go back anymore in this continent called America, on the American continent. My family's been here forever. You know, I remember there was a story that was told to me by one of my great uncles, and I didn't believe him until probably about 10 years ago. He said to me, and I don't know if you've heard this. He said, "Well, you know, Columbus came here." I said, "Yeah, he came here after Amerigo Vespucci." And he said, "Yeah, okay, you learned your history." He said, "But did you look at the picture that he sent back?" I said, "Yeah, they were dark skinned." He said, "So let's clear this up. Indigenous people, whether they're Native American or African, they're nomads. When Columbus came here to the East Coast, yes, they were African."
I'm not sure I understand.
My watch is talking to me.
Your phone was trying to understand that they came before Columbus. You know, and I know it's a new concept to folk.
I'm like, my family has been here a really long time. In fact, I still have cousins who said that their family has been here, you know, as far back as the 1500s. And I was like, "How can you prove that?" And they said, "Because our family was here before the white people got here." And you sit back and you're like, "Well,
Yeah. And this is another great episode, The Immigrants That Made Me, episode 3, Vangie Williams. You froze there for a second, Vangie, so
okay."
I tapped in.
That's
But
probably a
yeah,
good
we
thing.
were here before Columbus.
Oh,
We were
yeah.
here in many cases before the I'm going to stop. This is your story.
Oh,
And you know,
no.
we're coming to I want to kind of bring this to a nice package. You've learned so much from your fore-parents.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that say about America now?
You know, I think what it says about America now is that there are several Americans who forgot that. You know, I actually had this guy, I heard him say to someone who I know their family has been here for at least 3 generations, at least. And they've asked me to trace their family tree. And I was like, I'll do it for you because I want to find this out. And I found out that that person is related to me on a long line of my family. And I said to her, we have to teach Americans that you're American regardless of when you got here. But do not tell me or anyone else who looks to be of a different shade than Caucasian that they should go back home. This is my home. And I don't think anyone's any less American than another family, than another type. But if you're Irish or German, I'll give you a great example. My grandfather, George Roots, Isaac Smith, was a German Irish Jew. Did not get here until the mid 1800s. That is an immigrant family, and they're Irish. So you know how they were treated. They were treated just as bad as Black people. For you, a descendant who was treated just as bad or worse than Black people, to think that you are above another person because of their race, creed, color, or religion is probably the most un-American thing that could be. My grandparents taught me to be the proudest of American blood. They told me that our blood runs so deep into this soil that if it wasn't for the uncles who disappeared and never were seen again in the soil, or the women who were raped and created children who were then eliminated and put back into the soil. They're stories that people don't want to hear. We have to get America back in a place where we all see us as we are, Americans. And I'm going to tell you, look, Seko, I got more American flags around me than most people ever have. I love our flag. And when I see people recolor it or hang a presidential flag under it, it disrespects our flag. But yet they want to talk about us kneeling for the right to live. You know what lives matter? Yes, Black lives matter. And until all Black lives matter, American lives won't matter, because we're treating Americans like, what's the word? Like we don't belong. And that hurts. And I look at my immigrant history, and I know for a fact that majority of the people who are raising all this ruckus and all this hate are even more immigrant than the people who they want out of this country. And that really has to change in our country. And I know that the man that's sitting in the White House right now is pushing this narrative. We got to do this on our own. No president should be able to cause this much division within a nation. And no, I'm going to say this, no politician should drive that narrative, whether for themselves or for others, that a culture is better than another. Only in America can we say that one race. I went to Poland and Romania. I saw a Black Polish person. What did they say? They didn't say I'm African Polish. They're Polish. You go to Jamaica, you're Jamaican. You go to Cuba, you're Cuban. Now you can claim the Afro-Cuban, but let me ask you this. How many people knew about the Afro-Mexicans? These are Mexicans, Africans who went across the Mexican border and blended and assimilated into a population, and they're Americans. They can come back.
But additionally, the second president of Mexico was of African descent. So, we've had the Afro-Mexicanos for decades. Interestingly enough, the United States Army helped to free the enslaved Africans in Mexico.
Yes.
Original sin of slavery here in the United States of America. That's kind of hypocritical. But we do. Yeah. Salute to our Afro-Mexicanos. Yeah,
That's
we know
right.
about y'all. We know about y'all.
My great grandma told me one thing that I thought was so cool. In fact, the way she said it, my grandma said something so cool. She said, "You look at me," and she said, "I can walk into any store and people try to figure out what race I am. I look Indian. I look Black. I look multicultural." She said, "I tell them I'm American." When people ask me now, and I picked that up from her, I think when we first met, someone asked, and I told you, I've been asked, "Are you a Republican or a Democrat?" No, I'm American. Stop asking me what my political affiliation is. I am American. I can vote any way I want. But I'm going to tell you what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to vote for crazy. I'm not going to vote against my own best interest. And I'm definitely not going to vote just because someone has an initial after their name of an R or D. I'm going to vote for the best candidate because I need to make sure that people are represented by a person who wants to represent all people, not some, not ones who are lighter than others, darker than others, live down the wrong street or what have you. And even more importantly, I want to make sure they look at social economic levels and treat people with respect across the spectrum. Because that's where it really hurts, because there are a lot of poor white people who are treated just as bad as Black people in the rural areas because they're considered what we're not going to call that title, and it's not nice.
And we've learned, listened, and we're now shining from another great episode of Beyond Higher Heights with Vangie Williams. So you can see the stars in the background, and we can see the stars on your scarf.
Eastern
So,
Star.
all right. Salute to the Eastern Stars. You've been watching Beyond Higher Heights with Vangie Williams. Last words, Vangie.
You know, this is the time of our lives that our children really need to identify who they are. This is not a time to pick a race and say, I'm going to stick with it. This is a time to teach and educate our children on why, how, and when people died for the right to vote, for the right to cross the street, walk, talk, drive, eat, shop while being a minority. As a Black woman, I can tell you, it's really shameful that we have digressed back into like the 70s, 60s, and 70s lately. And we all have to do this together to build our nation back better, because right now, this is not it. And right now, we are facing, I'm going to say it, we're facing what do I want to say? We're facing a crisis of our country. I'm not even going to say it's a political crisis. This is a crisis for all. Because when one falls, we all fall. So get out there and vote and make sure that your voice is heard, so that no matter what color you are represented, and that you're represented fairly, and that you're represented as an American. And by the way, protect our immigrant population, because last time I checked, if it wasn't for a lot of the immigrants that came to this country, we would not have the country that we have right now or before. Build back better. Biden, Harris, Warner.